process, and then we'll talk about what's next. So you can see that we have a very, very full agenda, and we hope that you can stick with us till the end. We will make sure that we share these slides with you, and even if we don't go real deep into some of the content on the slides, they are there for, for reference. All right, and we want to thank our partners. We've got the Black Community Collaborative here. We've got COAL, which is the Coalition of African American Leaders. We also have the Westside NAACP and E4E, Educators for Excellence, as our partners for tonight. Okay. And as luck would have it, my computer, whenever I'm in front of people, it tends to do its own thing. All right, so I went over what we're going to cover, but here are our speakers. And these are in alphabetical order, not necessarily the order in which we appear. We have Carl Brinson, president of Chicago Westside NAACP. Karina Dema, she is an organizer with Educators for Excellence. We have Natasha Dunn. She is the founding executive director of the Black Community Collaborative. We have Lafayette Ford. He is a retired LSC coordinator. We have Dwayne Truss. He's a member of the Westside NAACP as well as Chicago Board of Education member. And Craig Wimberly had another engagement, but he is definitely a very engaged partner of ours. He is the president of the Coalition of African American Leaders, or COAL. All right, we want to acknowledge Karina. She has been an excellent partner, very supportive in our initiatives, and we too want to reciprocate and be supportive of her. You will hear from her in more detail when we talk about campaign finance and bringing about equity by taking out, the big money influence into the elections and giving greater opportunity for rank and file people to run for these offices. All right, so here are pictures. You heard the list of people who are involved. We indicated who we are and why we do this work. And we talked about what it is we do. I'm not going to go into our accomplishments. You'll be getting these slides and you can read for yourself. And here are some of our supporters. And without further ado, we will hear from Dwayne Truss. He will share, some of the key dates in the history of the Board of Education. And Dwayne, let me know if I need to make this larger or if there's anybody in the audience, if I need to make this larger. Okay. Dwayne?
Yep. You hear me now? Yeah, I had to make
Yes,
sure I'm
sir.
here. Yeah, and I'm gonna
Okay.
also kind of like with this, I think it'd be appropriate for Mr. Lafayette Ford to jump in part of this history, especially when it comes down to the Reform Act.
Mm-hmm.
The first fact that I just want to point out is that Chicago has never had an elected school board. It's pretty much been appointed in all this different forms over the years. The big key point started in 1980 when, I think those of us who remember way back when, when it seems like the system is under financial stress every other year, that the Finance Authority was mandated by the state to take over CPS because of issues with finance. That you probably think people heard about what was his name, Secretary of Education William Bennett, when he named Chicago public school
Mm-hmm.
system as the worst in the country, and that pretty much gave some of the reform groups advocates the opportunity to say, hey, we need education reform. and it led to these different pieces in the timeline. And again, Lafayette, step in when you know, feel free. Um, the Reform Act 88 is right there in front of you. It expanded 11-member board, created a 15-member board of education, and then there was that school board nominating commission, which it worked really, really hard. And I want to defer to Lafayette on this one and the 1995 School Reform Act, if you don't mind, because he lived through it.
Okay. Uh, yeah,
Actually, he was part of all of that.
um, with the element of the initial local school councils, there was a lot more power that came to people than folks realized. Not only were we doing what the local school councils at the individual schools had issues with, but back then we actually had 23 districts, and from the local schools, they all nominated someone to be on a district council. So in addition to picking actual principals, we also had to vote on the contracts for the district superintendents. All right. In addition to that, there was a local school council nominating commission, which comprised of, again, members from each one of those district councils, plus 5 appointees by the mayor. So there was 27 people who acted as a nominating commission. That commission was charged with reviewing and looking at people to be nominated for the Board of Education. Now, the unique thing was the mayor could either review the slates of candidates that we gave, he could reject them, or he could choose one from them. What they could not do is they could not just choose outside of it. All right. Because of the size of the group of 27 people, when we went downstate, we were not funded. We had no offices, things like that. Fortunately, we did get support from the Joyce Foundation, which gave us offices, it gave us a secretary, and it also brought consultants in to help. Um, when we went downstate, they actually said that they did not know how we were able to do our job, because the intent was that we were going to go into a room and kill each other, and then by the next year that they would be able to have give the mayor more control over the actual appointment of members. We did that for more than 5 years. And as political people wanted to say, everything is politics, but it wasn't until 1995 where they were able to reduce the number of people that we were able to nominate, and finally where the mayor was able to appoint directly. But in addition to that, they now came up with a person being a CEO over the public schools and not just a general superintendent. So the person did not have to have a PhD in education any longer. So they changed the whole structure of how the school board was funded at that time and the powers that they had. So they came up with a CEO, then they came up with a chief education officer, and a couple of other officers that were then directly appointed by the mayor. So all the power over the school board shifted over to the mayor's office, and that was in 1995.
And like that, you know, jumping fast forward to 2012, the beginning of the efforts of those in the community groups, as you can see, CTU and other neighborhood organizations. We apologize if we left anyone out. There was no intention to leave anyone out. We know there was a lot of people working to make this happen, organizations throughout the city of Chicago. And so what we have was in 24th Ward, we're going to give her her flowers before you know, right now. We were circulating petitions in the precincts, and then Valerie Leonard and her group with Londell Alliance was like, you know, let's circulate the whole ward in order to get the question on the question, should Chicago have elected school board on the ballot as a referendum. And 90%, over 90% of the people who voted said yes, who voted on the referendum. So that gave us great momentum. And then you had Representative LaShawn Porter introduce HB 5727 to create a task force to study the issue about a school board. And also, Valerie, jump in, because I believe that started, but then that got kneecapped down in Springfield.
Right.
You got,
That
you got.
But I went by Oak Park Arms. They said that they didn't have memory care.
I'm not sure if you got Bernard.
No, no, it wasn't me. You had told me to go by
Valerie, you
that.
have the ability to mute
but
him.
our can you okay,
Yeah.
I do.
No, I checked that
Bear
this morning, and they don't have
bear
daycare.
with me.
No problem.
I got
They have
you.
supportive living.
Oh, oops. Okay, I've
It's
muted.
another little nugget. Yeah, don't worry about it. It's another
Okay.
little nugget I want to throw out there. Is there a next slide after this one
Um, I
about the
took
timeline?
that one away because it was redundant to
Okay.
what you're going to be presenting later in terms of where we are today, the law.
Okay.
There were
Okay.
some things in there. If you want to talk about it off the cuff, if there's something that
I'll wait for that point. But I do want to make one little tidbit here, and we'll come back to it if people want to. Is that the current CEO? There was a structure created where we had multiple people interviewing and make the recommendation to the mayor about who should be the CEO. If we were really mean, we could have said this is voted for the CEO, but it was just that because previous mayors had the opportunity to appoint a CEO, we deferred and left that tradition in place for former Mayor Lightfoot. So there was a technicality that did allow us to actually vote in a CEO without mayoral approval, but that would have been a big mess. So
yeah, I can
so
imagine.
that okay. So next on the next slide, responsibility of the
Yep.
Board of Education. So pretty much, the Board of Education is the oversight, governance, oversight of the district, both organizational and financial, the two biggest pieces. We establish policies. We do not establish laws. We work with then there's the management. The management being the CEO, governance being the board. Two separate staffs, but we work together to make sure that whenever there's a policy or initiative created, we go back and say, let's talk through it, work through it. Make sure, and one thing I'm proud about my colleagues when I served on the board, that we really worked hard to make sure that there was a process to engage stakeholders, especially parents. So if you can go to the next slide. The next slide. Okay, there we go. So here, Valley talked about, I think, like I talked about the chief level. Okay, we did recommend, or there was consensus behind the CEO. We do approve the chief education officer, but again, we give deference to the CEO to be able to pick his or her own team. Uh, the capital projects, again, we do on the management side, and we did. I can only talk about when I served on the board. Um, challenge management to make sure they came up with a fair process and make sure we got some assessments, not just somebody walk out, look at a building and say, we want this. We tried to minimize the politics of one group, screaming louder than the other group saying they need this, because, we had to fairly make sure that we oversaw the capital improvements throughout the district and make sure everything was equitable. The district and the school budgets overall, if it's over certain contracts, I think it's $25,000 that the threshold was lowered to give principals a little more discretion to be able to spend some stuff. And then it was like I think it was 25,000, but if it wasn't, my bad. Um, it's funny is the review and approve all research agreements. Again, something like that. That was a big dust up about that. And we again leave it up to management because we don't have the the time or the bandwidth to be able to sit down through negotiations of everything. Review and approve all collective bargaining agreements. I would tell everybody straight up, this was like something, if you want to call us rubber stamp, this was rubber stamp. The only rubber stamp piece, because we did not get directly involved in any collective bargaining agreement. That was strictly between management and the representatives of the employees. Uh, Review and approve all CBO policies. uh, I will touch on that. When I first got to the board, that was the beginning of the end of the school ratings policy. Got rid of that. Also, when I was on the board, we moved to shift, let's say SRO, school resource officers, and police officers in school. We moved that, and because people didn't know that the principal, those who did know, congratulations, but the principal was the person who decided whether it was a police officer in the school or not. And the board, some agree, some disagree, but we felt as though that should have been at the school level rather than imposed anybody wholesale or taken away wholesale. Next slide, please.
Okay, and before we advance, someone has her hand raised. We'll answer questions at the end if you don't mind, either posting in the chat or you can ask the question live after the presentation. We got so many slides, and the temptation for me, I know I'll get bogged down in the conversation. We'll never get to the end.
Oh, sorry. I thought at the beginning you stated we can ask questions as you go along, but maybe I misunderstood what you were saying. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
So,
okay.
Yeah, so here's the structure. It's subject to change under any new administration. When you have this structure, it's pretty much been consistent based on law in terms of the Board of Education, the CEO, the Inspector General, who's William Fletcher. That person serves as independent. I'm not going to get into the weeds of the whole structure, but this is important to me personally because the Inspector General, and then you have the Office of Student Protections. Oh, and that's ran by Cami Pratt, that works together to deal with issues of misconduct and sexual abuse. We've had more than anybody would want in terms of that type of misconduct by not only just staff and students. You can go to the next slide, please.
Okay, we'll talk about the roles of the LSCs in school governance. Okay, Lafayette.
Okay, I unmute myself.
Okay.
Okay, so as you know, that the initial Reform Act in 1988 had LSCs to give parents, teachers, and communities the ability to have improvement, not only at their local school level, but also it was at a district level. That power has been eroded, especially since 1995. So with the advent of the mayor being able to make direct appointments to the school board, and we were no longer able to select the district superintendents. All right, you can go to the next one. There's support, there's a unit that gives support to the local school council people to make sure that they have technical support and help training and understanding what their role and responsibility is. They do help with the school-based academic plan and how to help direct where the money goes for any discretionary money in each one of the schools. They also have an evaluation plan for principals and able to then either renew principals contracts every 4 years or to select a new principal at the end of that time. However, the local school councils at this time have not been engaged in the question of what's happening with elected school board. Some people would say that the elected school board doesn't have that much to do with local school councils, but that's not true. The school board has had a number of rules and regulations that they generate for the local school councils. And in addition to that, part of what the board is supposed to be doing is helping to educate parents, staff, and community onto educational issues. So certainly they need to be able to come out and let people know what is happening with this law, how it's being developed, not for the school board to take a particular position, but for parents to be educated with it so that they then could go and work with their state representatives and their state senators who will be voting on this law.
All righty. So this is the part that I think is important, but it's not the most glamorous part. Key laws and guidelines governing creation of electoral districts. You will probably in the next few weeks be seeing a lot of maps, a lot of pretty colors, a lot of squiggly lines, and we need to understand the laws that govern those boundaries and how important they are. Because when we do redistricting or create districts, it's really not about the boundaries themselves. Is what is the resources and the leadership that come about as a direct relationship. It's about the community's ability to come together and make change and all of that good stuff. So every time you look at a district map, keep that in mind. So the very first law of the land that govern these district maps is Article 1 of the Constitution. And that deals with apportionment. It talked about how government was going to, well, how Congress was going to be divvied up, I guess, amongst the states, their representation, making sure that the representation was proportionate to the population of every state. And then, there was a big uproar, a controversy over slaves and how they should be counted. The free states did not want to count slaves because they felt that states that had slavery, if you put your representation based on where the slaves are, so to speak, those states would have more power than those states would have more power than the ones that didn't have slavery. So at that point, they came up with a compromise where they counted 3 out of every 5 slaves to kind of, balance the scales. Wasn't perfectly equal, but that was the attempt. The 14th Amendment, undid all of that, right? So it gave us the equal protection under the law convention, and that really undergirds the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So you'll hear references when people talk about the maps, saying that, this map is in compliance with the Voting Rights Act of 1965 on the federal level and some of those conventions, and we'll talk about some of the conventions. But basically, the Voting Rights Act of 65 was to keep you from keep states from putting undue requirements on people, things like counting the number of soap bubbles in a bottle, in a bar of soap, poll taxes, literacy tests, and all of that stuff. But this is the part of the law that you'll probably hear most about, not necessarily because they're talking about the law, but when they're describing the various types of districts, right? So the federal law, as well as our state Voting Rights Act, provides for 4 types of districts. We've got the majority minority district, where either, some minority group is in power, or a language minority group. So it's a racial minority who is in power more than 50%, or a language minority. And a coalition district is a district where you might not have enough of a minority to create a majority, but there may be 2 minority groups who together might constitute a majority, and they can get together and elect someone of their choice. You've got the crossover districts where white people are in the majority and they will in fact vote for a minority person. And then you got the influence district where a minority group, they might be comprised of say 15 to 20% of the people. Is not enough of them to win an election, but they can definitely be a swing vote and influence the outcome. And you'll hear that when people talk about their maps. So as a basic guideline, districts have to be compact when you can, and that means you don't want to have districts that are so far apart that nobody knows each other, right? You want to keep communities together. The districts have to have equal population. See, that went all the way back to the Constitution, that Article 1. The districts have to be contiguous. That means they can't be split apart. Every part of the district has to touch some other part of the district. You can't have a street that goes through the district and cut it off into two separate parts and be called one district. And the district can't be drawn in ways that will violate the law. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this back over to Dwayne, and he's going to talk about the legislation that created the elected representatives school board. So when you see ERSB, that's elected representative school board, and that's the way the state law reads.
Okay, so the current school board comprises 7 members. We'll expand to 21 members in 2025. As Valley talked about, Chicago shall be divided into 10 electoral districts, hopefully in compliance with the Voting Rights Act. Each district, as you said, let me go through that. November 24th.
Okay, clarification. You want it to be in compliance with the Voting Rights Act, but in compliance with the enabling legislation that created the elected school board. It calls for 10 members in 10 districts, I'm sorry, in 2024.
I would tell you all right now, sometimes I'm one of Valerie's, the daughter of our favorite lawyers out there, whether it be Perry Mason or Thurgood Marshall, because she's great with this. Okay, so we got a election coming up in November where 10 members will be elected in these districts.
I was thinking the same thing about lawyer, Dwayne.
For real. Yeah, she's Johnny Cochran's little daughter. So the mayor, by December 16th, the mayor will also appoint 10 members to those same districts. I understand they got to be from that district to make sure that there's that representation, and they're served 2-year terms. Also, December 16th, he will appoint a school board president from anywhere in the city, basically at large. Now, the members he appoint and the president, which will be, citywide at large, they have to go through the city council and obtain the advice and consent of the city council. We still trying to figure out what does that mean, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so all 21 new school board members, half elected, half appointed, will be sworn in office January 2025. But one thing I want to caution everybody is that I don't care where you live in the city of Chicago, whatever we vote on impacts everyone.
That's true.
So any member should be conscious of that. In November 2026, the 10 mayoral appointed seats will switch to being elected to 4-year terms. These members will be up for re-election in 2030. In November 2026, all Chicago voters will elect a school board president at large. I'm thinking it might be a trust fund, baby, because you're gonna spend a lot of money like running for mayor. And by January 2027, all 21 members will have been elected. And from that point on, the school board elections will be staggered. 2 things, and she's going to get into that a little later, Karina.
Right.
But that's the gist of it. But also, there was another point. And again, when we get to the maps, you're going to see that these are going to be some large districts still, at least the first time around.
Oh, yeah.
Next slide. And I'm gonna share this with Natasha, if that's okay. Something I know she's passionate about. Jump in at any time, Natasha. Is that the Lake School Board legislation calls for the creation of a non-citizen advisory board to ensure academic success of non-citizen children in CPS. There is no committee for Black children, despite the fact that, well, let's just put it this way. Many decisions in the past, and even fairly recently, have negatively impacted Black children in terms of many of these school actions. And someone asked in the chat, why was school ratings removed? We talk about that later. But when you read the legislation and it's like, basically, this is codifying rights for those who are like non-citizens. If you're, Black, white, Latino, purple, you're a citizen, you don't get a seat at the table in a sense. I mean, when you really look at that particular section of the law, and it enshrines in the law that there's going to be all these different things that non-citizen advisory board or non-citizens can do. But I'm not going to apologize for the fact that considering what's been happening to Black kids, it's like there's no codification or nothing that says, we need to have that Black voice at the table. And that was one of my many frustrations serving on the board, is that you had so many people come in there and wanting to tell you that they know what's best for Black folks without talking to Black folks. And this is an opportunity for us as a community to say that, hey, we get it. It would more likely be advisory, but it gets your feet in the door to go ahead and expound on that. Natasha, I'm waiting for you to jump in.
I could jump in. Listen, I am all for allowing our experts to have a space to speak, and I sit back when I need to sit back. And if you tell me to jump in, I'm ready to go. And and this is very passionate to me, as many of you know. And the reason being is because, I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to succeed. And what we know right now is that Black children have absolutely nothing in the system to really protect them and to preserve their right to a free, high quality education, or access to that education. And so when we saw that there was a clause within the law that allowed for non-citizens who, I believe that they should have an opportunity to be able to have access to the board and be able to have a platform for them to be able to, share their needs. But when we talk about our citizens, our Black citizens who have experienced historic harm, like from CPS, like direct historic harm, decades, it to me was completely unacceptable that there was nothing in the law to really help rectify the harm that has been done, and then allow for space. In 2019, the Black Community Collaborative was actually founded around the time that the CTU was going to go on strike. And our primary goal of being founded was that we wanted to ensure that the Black community had a voice in terms of what education is to our community, and what our experiences within the education, the public education system is. We didn't want our voices to be muffled out between the CTU and the CPS, right, conversation. And so with that being said, looking at data, we see that Black students are the furthest behind any, and you can go to the next slide, Valerie. I'm kind of going on and on. I'll go in on this.
Yeah, I was going to jump in a second, but just also mention about what happened about you getting kneecapped, and you had something going on with Dr. Sweeney.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, bear with me.
It's an echo.
I heard an echo, but I went down a rabbit hole with the sharing. I had to stop sharing and then share again. Okay.
Could you briefly talk about that, Natasha, about the
and so is there an echo when I'm talking? Is there an
echo? Yeah, I hear an echo. I can understand you. I'm not quite sure where the echo is coming from.
Well,
I think the safe thing to do is if everyone who isn't talking is on mute, then we might eliminate that possibility.
Yeah.
So Natasha's the only one who's not muted right now.
So when we were founded, we decided to really put out a call to action, really a call to bring together our community to address this crisis that we felt within the public school system in terms of educating our children. We reached out to Chicago Public Schools, we reached out to the Chicago Teachers Union at the same time, along with our elected officials, to really come together around the common thread of closing the gaps for Black students. Let's address this historic harm. 87%, almost 90% of the school closures in 2013, that historic year where they closed 50 schools, 90% of that was in the Black community. But prior to that, and I know you guys talked a little about history, school closures within our community started in 2000 or 1999. So we had more than 50 schools that were closed in Black communities. We've had the most mergers and just shakeups to our public institutions than any other race of people. And we can't lie and pretend that when we look back, really now it's 20 years later, that it has not dismantled our community, because it has. And so as a result, we put out this call to Chicago Public Schools to create a Black Student Achievement Task Force. We wanted to work on the level of CPS because we felt like, okay, that's where we need to be. At minimum, we need to be in CPS, peeling back data and really having a really authentic conversation with leadership and figuring out ways.
Natasha, can we save some of that for
Oh,
the other
yeah.
section?
Oh, the
Yeah.
proposal.
So
Okay.
Yeah, for the needs assessment.
I got
So
you.
to sum it up, if I can sum it up, it's just basically if it's not codified, any new administration, and I think Lafayette can also shake your heads on this, is that they'll come in and they'll start something, and then new administration come in and they say, well, we got different priorities, and it just becomes a vicious cycle in a sense. So this goes to Lafayette now.
Okay, I'm just giving a very brief overview of what our proposal is. As you've seen, we've already went through a good portion of it, and I'll follow a little deeper in it. We're concentrating on two things. Certainly the question of focusing on the achievement of Black students is critical. We have to understand the budget this year for Chicago Public Schools is $9.4 billion. $9.4 billion. We're down to just under 340,000 students, but that comes up to, we're getting ready to break a record of almost $30,000 per student is what it allocates out to.
Wow.
And our kids are not achieving. And we need to make sure that, and we're very unapologetic about this, that we want to make sure that there is something that a committee of people who are looking at what is happening with education with Black children across the board on a continuous basis, and focus not only on what the issues are, but what they prescribe as being some solutions, and concentrating on that. They'll go deeper into that, but that's our main objective. That's something we're not going to back up on at all. And we want it in the legislation, because if it's not there, nobody else can do it. If we don't get it through the state, we're going to have to push the city council to put that into as a guaranteed thing for any person that's appointed to that board by the mayor. The second thing certainly is looking at the districts and making sure that they are balanced in a number of ways, and making sure that it comes out right. What people may not remember is the initial LSC election was actually nullified by a judge, because at that time, parents could only vote for parents, community could only vote for community, and the CTU went to court that said that since it was taxpayers' money, that there had to be equal voting possibility. And that's what it is now. Parents and community can now vote for each other with no problem. That's why it's important that whatever slate they come up with the type of districts that's going to be, it has to balance out and make sure that it follows all the rudiments of the law across the board. So those are our two main things that we're looking at, and now we'll have someone start going into a deeper dive on those.
Yeah, and then just to remind people what Lafayette spoke of, that goes back to our Constitution, the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, one vote, one man, one vote.
You can go to the next slide. So
Okay.
here are the benefits of what we believe will happen from what we're looking at, is that we're going to have to optimize the potential for voters to be elected to the Board of Education and the candidates of their choice. Understand that the first election is going to take place during the presidential election. So it's going to be a whole lot of people out there voting, and we're going to make sure that this thing is straight across the board. It increases the accountability of the elected school board members, because now when you have the aldermen need to be working alongside the two representatives from those particular districts that we laid out, there's accountability that they can't play off each other and say, well, only part of that is mine, is part of somebody else's, so I want to defer. No, this is your area, includes your whole board. And yes, you got to work with four of the aldermen and those two representatives, but now there's accountability that goes about it. There'll also be better coordination with the impact of what's happening with those schools. Remember, more than 40% of our students are not in home schools. They go all around the city. And right now, one of the biggest things tomorrow at the board meeting is going to be the fact that we're missing over 600 bus drivers. So people can't get to schools right now. This is a very critical type of situation that has to be addressed one way or the other. Of course, we're going to make sure to go along with the voting rights, and the areas are going to be continuous as best we can. So there's no little lines that's going to be trying to connect somebody by 2 or 3 blocks. They're going to be holistic in how they're looked at, and the communities are going to be as together as possible, and that's physically. So we think that our proposal has those benefits that are built into it. You can go to the next slide.
Okay, and Natasha, you will continue.
Okay. Yeah, and so
I'm sorry, and before you go into this, did you want to finish your experience?
yeah,
Your
no, I was
personal
gonna do that.
experience?
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
No, so we started this work under Dr. Jackson and Sweeney. So they took on the mantle and agreed that that Black students are struggling in the system and that something needs to be done. And so we met and we worked with Dr. Sweeney, and we started really looking at data, and we started really, building out what a Black Student Achievement Task Force would look like for the city of Chicago and how we will tackle this. And so why do we need this committee? The Chicago Public Schools population is nearly a third Black. And our children are suffering, as I stated earlier, from a lot of different problems. And we've experienced more than 50 school closures. Even though it says 50 here, it started back in 1999 and it has continued. And we also are aware that it's going to be probably more school closures coming up within the next, after the moratorium is due. Black children as a group have suffered significantly learning loss, trauma, isolation, and reduction in social and emotional support. So we know that during the pandemic, that has really exacerbated a lot of some of the gaps that were already there. And that's one of the reasons why we decided to really push for this Black Student Achievement Task Force originally within CPS, is because we predicted this loss. We knew there was going to be some loss, and we want to look back on it now. We see that it was a catastrophic failure. As I would say, the whole remote learning situation really did not help our children. They suffered greatly. In 2021, 80% of Black children graduated from high school in 5 years, as compared to 85% of Hispanic children, 91% of white children, and 92% of Asian children. African American students currently comprise of 36%. Well, that was as of 36. Well, African Americans as a population, we comprise of 36% of Chicago public schools, but account for up to 61% of the suspensions And that's a large portion of students that are suspended. And today, there's new data that's coming out. We haven't been able to get access to that yet, but I know the 20th day numbers have already been tabulated. But as of last school year, we were comprised of 35.8%, which really what I've seen in studying the data from over 20 years, we've had the most dramatic loss of students. We've had over 100,000 students that have been lost to CPS, Black students, over 100,000. And African-American children account for 63% of school referrals to the police, 83% of the detention centers and detainees into Cook County. So when you think about this is a direct line to the school to prison pipeline, right? It's almost like our schools are really funneling and creating that pipeline for our children. Next slide.
Yes, ma'am.
So this says between March 8th and March 12th, daily average of 89%. So this was in 2021. A lot of students didn't show up for in-person class. But one of the things, and this is not in here, what the Black Community Collaborative did was that we actually studied the online, when kids were virtually learning, we noticed that over 50% of the high school students were not logging in. So only half of the students were, half were not. And in this case, when school reopened again, we had a large amount of our students who were not going to class. And approximately 88% of school actions, as I talked about earlier, has been in Black communities. And unfortunately, these disruptions have also disrupted really the fabric of our community. We have a lot of empty buildings littered in our community. We just recently in the South Shore have filed a lawsuit against the City of Chicago and the Board of Education. And we've most recently added Brandon Johnson to the lawsuit because we're trying to fight to not have migrants be housed in one of our public school buildings that we now realize has a need. So there's students in our community that need that high school to actually go. So we're fighting to get that school reopened. A WBEZ investigative report has found that there's a lot of mental illness within our community, and it has increased over the years. And these are students who are typically low-income students and students from our community. And the state is really failing to ensure that our children have the mental help and the mental assessments necessary to break through. One of the things that we found specifically during the pandemic and when students were at home was that there was a large uptick of school age crimes being taken place. Kids who are school age, committing crimes, carjacking and burglaries and things like that we've never seen before. We've also have a uptick in suicide among Black students as well, or Black children as well. So these are some of the real issues that are disproportionately impacting our children that really hasn't been happening before. This is a really unique time in our history where we're seeing some very deplorable things happening to our people, and we want to be able to have access to address these within the school system so that we can rise up as a people and make the school district a better district for all. Next slide.
Okay, just as soon as my computer complies.
Okay. So what do we mean when we say a Black Student Achievement Committee? Now, although we started this work up under Dr. Jackson, this is the reason why we believe this needs to be a law. Aside from the fact that we saw that there was a law in place for non-citizens, what happened was once Dr. Jackson stepped down and there's a new CEO, the complete committee, the things that we had worked on had also went away. And so we believe this is an opportunity to have something that's embedded in the law that will give us an opportunity to be able to close these gaps. This committee, we're looking to have a 15-member standing board committee with co-chairs from the Board of Education. So someone from the Board of Education will chair this committee. The overall goal is to eliminate Black student achievement gap. we want to design a data-driven strategic management process with CPS and stakeholders. And so, this is about really holding the system accountable in an authentic way. We want to be able to ensure that we have a system in place where we can measure and monitor what's working and what's not working, right? Because we've wasted too many years already, and it's time to really hone in and be intentional on closing these gaps. And we also want to be able to make reports on a quarterly basis to the community, to the board, so that we can make sure that we're actually meeting the benchmarks that we want to set forth. Next slide. And so the proposed Board of Education structure would look similar to this. So right now we have the Chicago Board of Education at the top, and then up under it are the committees within the Board of Education. Currently there is an Early Childhood Education Committee, there's the Finance and Audit Committee, and Dwayne, if you want to jump in and sort of talk about what these committees do, I don't know if we want to go into that, but we have these various committees. We have the Whole Child Committee, as well as Workforce Development and Equity. And currently, just recently this school year, the Special Education Committee was added as well. And so we're looking to add the Black Student Achievement Committee. And then in addition to that, there will be the non-citizen parent committee.
I just want to say for the record that all these committees outside what we're proposing, they're not codified by state law. They can be created by the board, or they can be taken away by the board, and we just don't do nothing, and they just be there in name only. So, but that's why we're pushing for this Black Student Achievement Committee.
Yep. And so unlike the rest of these, this will be the one that will be in law. And again, I believe this is something that will benefit the entire school district, again, because our numbers are dragging behind. And one of the things that I want to say real quick is that sometimes what happens is within data, we see how CPS and other systems, they use this Black and brown data or Black and Hispanic data. And when we peel back the numbers and we ask, okay, so when we talk about there's these improvements with Black and Hispanic students, who's really improving? It's never really the Black students' data. It's usually the Hispanic data that's really inching up, and ours is either stagnated or going behind. And so we just want to be able to have some equity within the system, right? We want to get to where Hispanic students are so that we both can, Hispanic and Black, and then get to where white students are. And so that we can then have a holistic system. But right now, Black students are falling behind. They've been behind, and it's time that there's a specific effort, and we need everyone on this line to really support this effort to be law.
Okay. And then there's Natasha, I wanted to add, people always ask, well, how come you need this data? People use these data, to beat people over the head, let them know that they're failures, blah, 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 blah. And your response to that, Natasha?
Well, number one, we need to be able to use that to be able to create solutions, right? So it's about using data so that we can create actionable, measurable, solutions so that we can close the gaps that we know exist. And we could see the gap. We see them in our community every day, right? And so that's part of the reason why I think it's important for us to be able to use that. And there's nuances within data. We know numbers are numbers, but that's why it's important for a committee like this, a culturally relevant committee, because we know the nuances. We understand that this is a number, but this family is a family that we know lives down the street from us, or we've been that family before, so we can understand what will be the solutions to go behind that.
Absolutely beautiful. Okay. Any other things you'd like to add before we go to the next?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Time check is 7:02.
Okay. I think we're making good time. We're more than half done. All right, so the second part of the proposal is the mapping proposal. So remember, we have a holistic proposal that will hopefully, create a really nice, complete policy and not just focus on politics of representation. And in fact, we try to do everything we can to minimize. We know we can't totally eliminate politics, but we definitely want to elevate equity in this whole process. So here's the state map, the last one that they proposed. And this map is overlaid over the ward maps. So if you see the white lines, those are the ward boundaries, and the colored lines, the heavy colored lines, those are the boundaries for the districts. This is the only map that the state drew. The law calls for 10 districts in 2024, 20 districts in 2026. They skipped the first part. So this, in our opinion, is an illegal map. But beyond that, it breaks up communities. We're using the wards, right, as a proxy for community. And, there's some wards that are, that may have, several districts in them. Some wards may only have one or two, right? The number goes from 2 to 7. And, that's not equitable for our elected officials, for, some that have 7 districts that they have to deal with, and others have 2 or 3, and vice versa for the elected officials. But you can see when the boundaries don't follow the ward lines, there's plenty of opportunity for confusion. There's also plenty of opportunities to have small pockets where people are separated from their wards, people that they normally work with on education and other issues, and then they're in a other district that they won't have any chance of really influencing the outcome of an election. So this is problematic for us and for the city if it gets passed. What's most, egregious to us as Black people is there is a racial gerrymander, in the Austin area. If you look at this orange district, most of this is the Austin area. You see, this is the 29th ward in Austin, the 37th ward. But rather than connect this area to, natural collaborators in the 24th ward, which is Black and includes Lawndale and East and West Garfield, and other communities like that, they connected Austin, rather than going south, connecting it to the 24th ward and the 27th ward and the 28th ward. They went all the way, looked like Ukrainian village or something. And then you got this little skinny line. It's like, who does that? Except if you're trying to gerrymander and split. And we raise concern about this. And the sad part is the state is not the only one who did this kind of gerrymander. We looked at maps that other members of the public have proposed. And for some reason, people like to split up Austin, and rather than pair Austin with Lawndale, East and West Garfield, they like to pair Austin with communities that Austin doesn't normally collaborate with, white, in the white community as well as Latino. And I'm not saying that they never work together, but that's just a very unnatural pairing, given history. It doesn't allow for the natural flow. Again, there are groups of aldermen who are typically working together, and this map doesn't take that into consideration. And I told you about the mismatch. So basically, all around the city, it's not just Black people, it's not just Latino people, it's everybody in the city has some opportunity to be disconnected from their community, whether they're Black, white, Latino. On the other hand, our proposal, is grounded in the ward map. And the thing here is we had 3 different versions, and this is our most complete version. We did several iterations taking into account not only what Black people's thoughts were. We met with people from the Latino community, we met with people from the Asian community, we observed testimony from the Jewish community, And all of that information was taken into account. So we drew our districts first, making sure that we were represented relative to our numbers in the population, which is the law pursuant to the Constitution, right? So we took care of ourselves first. And then after we did that, we took care of everybody else. And then when others had complaints or asked if we could tweak, we went through some gyrations and accommodated them. So we're the only group that did that. So I can honestly say that this is the fairest map of them all. We kept communities together. It is a map that encourages collaboration and focuses resources of the city as well as the schools on specific targeted areas, so that 2 elected officials for our schools can be working with 5 elected officials, who coordinate city services and policy. All of them can zero in, right, on the children in their area, right? So another good thing about this is once the boundaries are set for the city, that automatically sets the boundaries for the elected school board. Let the aldermen fight out how they're going to carve up the city, and let the people focused on education, let them focus on the educational issue. So we like this. We think it makes sense. We think it's equitable for everybody in the city. We think it's equitable for our elected officials. It's efficient. It helps the city as well as the school system really efficiently use their resources and focus them on the children, right? It's all about the children. All right, so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Karina Dema from E for E. She's going to first talk about board member compensation, and then after that, she'll talk about campaign finance. And the common denominator in everything that we've talked about is equity. Equity in terms of representation, equity in terms of how city and school resources are going to be shared, equity in terms of workload for elected officials, equity in terms of the resources that are allocated around the city and leveraging for a greater impact. So let me stop. I could go on forever. Karina, without further ado,
Yeah.
it's up to you to talk about the compensation.
Yeah. Okay. So first just I'll just do a little quick, like, who am I? Why should I care? Why should you care what I have to say? Right. Again, so I'm Karina Dema. I'm Chicago born and raised, CPS graduate, former CPS math and science teacher. I have 2 children in the public school system. I'm in it to win it. I think equity in public education is important for all of us. And I think systemic racism affects all children negatively. And I'm excited about being at a table that is all about dismantling that and creating true equity at every point here. So at Educators for Excellence, we organize teacher voice and make policy change. So while some organizations want to see parents being able to run, or community members being able to run for the Board of Education, I'm also representing teachers who may want to run as educated members for the Board of Education. So in terms of compensation, that is a key equity issue, correct? I mean, when we look at what the Board of Education does, especially as it transitions to be an elected role, which will kind of fundamentally change to some degree what a member does, because now they are accountable to a constituency as well. That makes it more and more like a full-time job. And it already was to some degree. There's a great deal of putting out of fires that could be prevented if it was treated more like the respected full-time job that it really is. But at the end of the day, I don't know who can afford to do a full-time job for free. Not me. So when we're talking about making this successful, we really need to look at compensation. in some form. So the slide you're looking at here is just some research of some larger school districts that are elected throughout the nation. So if you look at Denver, for instance, smaller districts, Nevada, they do like a small respectful stipend, probably commensurate with their cost of living. I'm sure it doesn't cost what it costs to live in Chicago as it costs to live out in Clark, Nevada. You look at Miami, Broward County, that's a little bit of a heftier stipend. What we're thinking is somewhere in between that. When you look at Los Angeles at the further end of the spectrum, that seems super inflated, right? That's a lot more money than I make, $125,000 a year. You'll see when we talk about campaign finance oversight, how in Los Angeles, how that compensation is kind of linked to their lack of campaign finance oversight. And so when we look at Los Angeles and the way that they've implemented their elected school board with almost no guardrails, how critical it is that Valerie and all the people in this room are doing this work now, because if we let this plane leave the runway without putting something around it, like there are lessons out there to be learned, and LA is one of them. Currently, board members are not compensated, as we know, but if you look on the right here, we have some examples. So there's support staff in place now for board members. And just for the 7 board members that we have, we're paying that cost is somewhere around $1.5 million just for 7 board members. So if we're talking about eventually having 21 board members, those costs are going to really rise exponentially. And so in terms of compensation, like we really need to get our arms around this. And so what we're talking about at E4E is really just like opening the conversation, because as the bill stands right now, there is no compensation allowed. There's literally a strike through in the word compensation in the elected school board bill. And so our push is like in veto session in October to push our lawmakers, like just erase that line. Let's just open the conversation and allow for the consideration, because as it stands, if you don't allow for compensation at all, if you take it off the table by scratching it out, I know loads of people who would be great board members who won't even consider it. So we're immediately scrapping so many intelligent, valuable, qualified candidates for an election that is literally around the corner. I think we can go to the next slide.
Okie dokie.
I can talk a blue streak about it. So, so yeah, I already said this, right? You know, our recommendation is simply to allow for it.
Yeah.
Okay, so campaign finance oversight. So moments ago, I just highlighted how in Los Angeles, their board members are making upwards of $125,000 a year. If we look at this campaign finance oversight slide, you'll see here that candidates in their campaigns, in their election campaigns, that includes commercials, billboards, other opportunities, you know, the types of stuff you see in electoral campaigns. There you can spend up to $7 million pumped into one seat. I mean, that's like federal election stuff. I mean, that's the stuff of like,
Wow.
Those are pretty high stakes numbers. And when you see numbers like that, what that says to me immediately is old rich white people or special interest groups, super right wing in the shadows, buying seats and securing them in order to make decisions within their moral compass for the larger population. And so if you don't have some kind of campaign finance rules in place, like where's the end? How do we have an even footing? The biggest problem here, though, is that campaign finance rules in this election have to be in line with campaign finance rules for Illinois elections. And you're going to have a really hard time finding a politician willing to make changes to campaign finance, because that means that they would have to change the way that they raise money when they're in an election. So while I'll be totally honest with you, because I have no choice, I don't see this moving a whole lot. I still think it's critical that people don't shut up about it, that people continue to say, question how much money is going into that campaign. How is that okay? How is that legal? How is that justifiable? So I'm a hopeful cynic, I guess, is the phrase. Maybe I'm making that up. I'll be loud about it, and I encourage y'all to please be loud with me. But I won't be surprised if that one doesn't get pushed through. My eyes are on the compensation prize. And again, all of these, as Valerie has so eloquently stated, are key pieces of making this entire process equitable. If you want normal people, everyday people, people from your community to represent you on the board, these are issues that we need to be loud about, or someone else is going to come in and take these seats. So I know I just said a lot of words. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and before you wind down,
Yeah.
can you just take one line of this graph next to it, or chart, and just to kind of walk us through what we're looking at when we look at all those pretty colors.
Yeah. So, and the blue, you have like charter school allies. So these are, reform ed, special interest groups, or PACs or people. And the yellow, we have, this is the Teachers Union of LA and other teachers unions. And then we have the SEIU, which is closely aligned, another union with teachers unions, right? And you'll see, while they kind of balance out until we hit 2017, then you have a huge investment coming from reform ed groups, aka charter school allies. There's just a huge influx and influence in the contributions that they're making through 2020. A huge amount of money is being spent there, up to, in 2020, this is up to $13 million being placed into these elections. And then, things have slowed down in 2020. My immediate takeaway is, why is there a downturn here? Pandemic. That's why. There's just money moved slower and more thoughtfully through the pandemic, because all the people with it wanted to make sure they kept it. But in the 2024 election in Chicago, my estimation and my colleagues' estimation is that you're going to see a big increase again since the pandemic is over. And so it will be interesting to see who spends the most. But the takeaway here is, at the end of the day, do we want reform ed groups, other special interest groups pumping $10, $15 million into a campaign for the people? Or do you want, Valerie to run for Board of Ed?
If you want me to run, that's a recipe for loss. Chicago ain't ready for reform, not for real
Not
reform.
true reform. Burn it down, build it back.
Yes. Okay. And thank you so much. That was very enlightening. And Carl Brinson, you are going to tell us what's next and take us home.
Ladies and gentlemen, here's the real hard part of all the hard work that has taken place with this committee and this group of August great number of people here. Just give you a brief timeline on what's taking place, but we can't put enough emphasis on what we need from our community and the public and from the individuals who are on this call. All this hard work and everything that's been taken, what you've seen and the time that has spent, and the energy has been poured into educating our community and sharing and putting some documents together and trying to put some legislation together to try to assist in the betterment of our communities and definitely in the betterment of our school systems and our kids. All this rests with our legislators in Springfield. And we have to be extremely active and we have to be very aggressive. And we and you who are on this call and the ones who are not on this call and not on Zoom are going to play a major role in this. This is where the hard part comes in at. Just quickly timeline on what the General Assembly is. Like I said, this race it rests with the General Assembly. The General Assembly adjourned in June the 30th. And they didn't get a map passed at that time. The deadline for them to pass that map is April the 1st in 2024. But we know they will not stretch it out and probably won't stretch it out that far. There's a veto session that's taking place from October the 24th to the 26th in October. That's one session of the veto session that they will be back in Springfield. And then the next time they will be back in the veto session in Springfield will be from from November the 7th to the 9th. Those will be the two moments and the two times that our legislators will be back in Springfield. And we're thinking in this veto session, they will be bringing up these issues of this elected, the stuff that's addressing the elected school board, and also all this other piece of legislation that runs around this, our education of elected school board. So those are the timelines, but the most important thing that we have to organize and also galvanize our people in the community and people in the street and let everybody know how important, how relevant it is. This work, don't let this work go for naught, ladies and gentlemen, because we've been doing this work and people have been trying to change and reform this. They might not be ready for change, ready for reform, but we got to put some fire up under their feet. And so we need the help from our community. We have to let it be known that this is very important, that we can't go around and sit around moaning and groaning about what you should have did, what we could have did, and I didn't know this and I didn't know that. We have to be prepared and be very proactive in educating our folks and getting them actively engaged in this whole process. Some of the things we like to see, some of the things we need to take place, some of what we need you to come in at. Tomorrow at Austin High School, we're going to host a press conference, and we'll be gathering at 231 on Pine at Austin High School. We'll probably be gathering at 3:30, and the press conference will take place at 4. And the same day after that, after the press conference, the board meeting will take place. And we'll be taking up the issue of the Black Student Achievement Committee and our map and the need for engagement with LSCs on elected school board issues. We will be having people testify on that. So we need people to be present at that event tomorrow. Definitely for the press conference, we need to show the people that we're serious and let people know we're concerned, let them know we're involved and that we're engaged. That's going to take place.
Is it okay that I interrupt you right there, Carl, real quick?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
So one of the things that I would like to let everyone know is that we've been asking the current standing Board of Ed to create just now. We want to get it codified into law, but we have also asked them to really, in their goodwill, create a committee, a standing committee now. And so we've been pushed back. We've had a little pushback. And so that's one of the reasons why we're also coming to this board meeting to really just say, elevate our voices again. So it's important you guys show up for that. Thank you.
And we can't express it enough. We have to show up and show out if necessary, but we have to let everybody bring someone, tell someone, because it's strength in numbers. And if they don't hear our voice, we're silent. And if we can't get nothing passed, we can get nothing done if we do not come together on this issue and make some noise behind it, put some feet and some legwork behind this piece. So that's what's taking place tomorrow at Austin High School. Also that's taking place that we need some input and need your feedback and also need you to sign up for is the Senate Special Committee on Chicago Election Representative School Board public hearing. It's going to be a virtual meeting that's going to take place. And you can see the link that's in there has the link you can go on. We need your voices to be heard and come in and just to testify and talk about what's been discussed and what's been shared with you tonight to show support for this and let them know that we'd like to have them support this initiative and this pieces of legislation and let them know how important it is to our community. That's going to take place on October the 3rd. And there'll also be another session will take place on October the 12th at 5 o'clock. These are very important places. The last time, and sad thing to say, this is when your voices are heard. This is when your voices are being recorded, and this is when you're being documented for going on record to really express your views and your concerns. And most of the time, and a lot of these times, our people have not been showing up, have not spoke up about the things that's really pressing us and affecting us. And so we can't continue this pattern, this behavior. That's why we're appealing to you guys and pleading with you guys tonight. Share it with somebody. Come out and support us on these crucial issues, on these crucial dates that you have in front of you. Like I said, the veto session will be going on until we don't know when they bring it up, but we have to get in front of it. It starts on the 10/24. But also what we have to do prior to that, we need you to start making phone calls to your state legislators and to your representatives to let them know that you're supporting the initiatives and the legislation that we are presented before you. Besides the testifying on those dates from the 3rd and the 12th, we ask you to call, contact Senator Lightford and Senator Matt Rich, Representative Ann Williams, asking them to support our proposal. Make those calls, ask them. Call your auto people, call Alderman Taylor to follow up through her because she asking her to host a public hearing on this elected school board. She spoke and she stated she would do it, but we have to put some fire under their feet to make sure that they would do this. Also call and ask the Black Caucus legislators also in the City Council Black Caucus and also the state legislative Black Caucus. It's important that we call these legislators and these automatic people to let them know that we are serious and we're concerned and we need their support to support this extremely important piece of legislation that's going to impact us for the rest of our lives and the rest of our kids' lives. So those are the things you can do. And I just can't say it enough that we need the help of our community to push this piece. So those are the things we need from you to tell someone, to reach someone, and to show up and to show out if need be. Thank you.
Awesome. So that concludes our presentation. I'm not going to show the last slide. It just basically asks if you have any questions, and I'll have my contact information. I think right now our time is better served answering questions that you might have. I think
I have a question.
yes,
You want to name between the chat or people raise their hands and re-ask the questions they put into the chat?
Yeah, I was going to look at the chat to see what types of comments. To me, it's always better when people ask their own questions. And Karina's gone. So if you have any questions about campaign finance, we will do the bestest we can to answer, knowing that we're not experts, and we can also put you in contact with Karina. All right. So I'm going to start with the chat questions, right? And then after the chat, then we will go to the raise hands. All right. Someone asked, can you please email a copy of the slides? I shall do that. And then a question of you, Dwayne, why was the school ratings removed?
Because they were being used as a punitive tool versus a diagnostic tool. We believed as the board at that time that the rating system has to be changed because there was a stigma placed on schools. For instance, once upon a time, I asked Ernie Duncan, school like Lane Tech, 100% of the kids are supposed to walk in there at or above grade level, right? But then by the time they get to their junior year, they go from 100% to 77%, but that's supposed to be a high performing school. And then you had another school which was rated level 1 because they were able to increase their numbers from 15% to 20% meeting requirements, but then there's 80% of the students who don't. So which one is the better school? And what we really focus on is like how to support schools, not punish schools. So if you look at the assessments and there's some deficiency somewhere, it's the correct thing to do is to provide the students resources, not stigmatize the school like, oh, your school is a horrible school because you're level 3.
Okay. Here's a comment. My understanding is that Mayor Johnson wants to allow non-citizens to vote in school board elections and other municipal elections. Another comment. I have a problem with the term diversity due to other cultures who benefit, but our children, and our means Black children, get excluded.
Valerie, the person who asked that
Someone,
question has their hand up. Will make a comment. Demetrius
yes,
first.
okay, Demetrius. And then Gerald.
Yeah, I guess I've always wondered, you know, we use that term diversity, but in the end, our children, they get excluded. And I do like this model that you're focusing on Black children. But also, I'm someone who taught in Evanston. I'm from Chicago. However, I taught in the suburbs. And here's my problem. Why don't all the schools in Chicago use the same curriculum? All of our 18 schools, I think when I was there was 16, but all those schools now 18, they use the same curriculum. Why don't they do that in Chicago?
Is that rhetorical, or do you want to answer? That's above my pay grade.
I would like an answer.
Okay,
So it's
that
my
might be worth a
understanding.
follow-up.
I want to say it's my understanding. I know that they have a curriculum that they use, which is Skyline. They all use it, but I think they use it differently. So each school is different. What I've seen in terms of inequities in CPS specifically is that you have, first of all, you have schools with different programs, and you have some schools that have more programs than another, right? Or you might have some schools that have access to more academic offerings than other schools have, more foreign language than other schools have. So that really is some of the biggest inequities that we see. But in terms of the curriculum, it's my understanding the curriculum is across the board, but of course each school might sort of implement it a little differently. But that's kind of how it is. But also CPS uses the student-based budget formula. And what that does is when you have a school that is based on per pupil, like you get paid based on per pupil, right? So how many students you have in the building is how much money you'll get for your school. So if you have a school that's under enrolled or underutilized, that school might be the school that might have the least amount of program offerings or academic support or whatever the case may be versus a school that has, let's say, thousands of students. They might have more offerings, but that's one of the biggest gaps that I've seen in the system.
Valerie, I'm gonna have to tag team this with got Mr. Morrow next. I'm not sure you want to jump in on that, but the previous board before us invested in Skyline because there was no system-wide curriculum that was the same. And what Skyline was designed to do is for each school, instead of taking a cookie cutter approach, each school would be able to cater this curriculum to the needs of their school, especially taking into consideration cultural diversity. For instance, if you want to focus more on a Afrocentric curriculum, you can do it. It's not mandatory for a school to use Skyline. They can, but prior to Skyline, teachers were basically, some teachers were using what they had in New York to create a curriculum, or they was going on Google a lot or different sources. So there was not, it was just too many sources. So this was just be able to give the school and the school leadership some flexibility. And I know Mick M has his hand up, but I hope that Mr. Morrow can add a little more to that.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is Gerald Morrow. I am a former principal at Dunbar Vocational Career Academy. I was actually removed in December. Here tonight representing Cole, and I am an organizer with Chicago Principals Association. The first thing around the Skyline curriculum, schools were allowed to choose if they really wanted to opt into this or not. So it was a school choice. So the opportunity was put there. The teachers were allowed to look at it and say yay or nay and how they can adapt it to each school. It is not a cookie cutter model. It has some things it does very well. There's some things that has some struggles with it, but for overall, it was pretty much accepted. There was a far more reaching aspect of why they needed to change the SQRP or the rating system. And it takes me to my point. we talk a lot about putting in new structures in place, but we have to be very careful. And I've seen this as a sitting principle. You can put all the new structures in place, but if you don't disrupt and dismantle the ones that have caused the inequities, all you're doing is basically putting a Band-Aid on a dam break. Principals have complained about this for years. We were told to come up with solutions to inequitable structures and systems that created problems. College persistence, there's no way that Finger college persistence is going to be the same as Brooks college persistence. When we look at inequitable structures, why does Brooks campus look one way and Finger campus looks another way? So we can come up with all the academic things we want, but what has been the mindset is the diversion of what has really been put in place of systemic oppression, systemic inequities that have caused these problems. And I think one of the things that we do need to focus on and align with the great solutions that we have already come up with is to call up and out and back into community what these structures are and identify them and make sure we realize the cause of them, because the effects are there. And a lot of times these structures were built, and it's the old saying, yesterday's solutions are today's problems. Exactly what's going on with Go CPS, SQRP. These things were caused off the systems that were built a while ago, but they do not fit what needs to be done in this district right now. So that being said, and the biggest thing is this, where a lot of us have fallen short, which are principles, we know that these are the problems. And we speak out against them, and if you do, they'll attack you. I'm one of the ones that were attacked. We have to have the courage to disappoint the people who want it to stay this way, because that's where your biggest adversary lies. It's not about just saying we're going to have this committee. It's about elevating, why did you want this to be this way? Because everything in Chicago public schools, Go CPS, SQRP, everything that we said, that later on, when 3 to 5 years later and the research comes out, there were people who were saying this does not work for all children. In other words, they knew this, but they still did it anyway to satisfy the elites. And we have a tale of two districts. They wanted to make sure that one population was happy, but the other population is what fell short. And we have to have a campaign to make sure that this work is done simultaneously, because there are going to be people who are going to be pushing on the other side that's saying this is great. I don't have a problem with selective enrollment, but I have a problem with inequitable structures that allow selective enrollment to have an academic center that feeds 7th and 8th grade children to selective enrollment. And I elevated the question, so what about Simeon, Dunbar, CVS, and PRASA having a vocational center for 7th and 8th grade kids who may not be interested in college? So we've elevated these questions in numerous spaces. And when I tell you they were ignored, they were ignored. So all of the problems that you are seeing, they are not just oops. And a lot of these things that you are seeing after the pandemic, when I was a principal at Ropes in Inglewood, these were problems 15 years ago that we ignored. So the chicken has just come home to roost. So my recommendation is I'm looking forward to the work, and I keep elevating this question everywhere I go, because it makes us be on the offensive and not the defensive. What is the educational agenda in the African-American community? We speak to it like Mount Greenwood speaks to their request. We don't go ask anything. We say, this is what we want at Finger. This is what we want at Brooks. This is what we want at Dunbar. This is what we want at Phillips, just like other communities do. That is one of the main focuses that I have seen, because I've sat in the system and my LSC was attacked because they said, no, at Dunbar, this is what we're going to put in place for our children. We put in Larry's Barber College. We put in a music studio. We put in an aviation program. All programs since I've been removed, the district has removed. So I just wanted to elevate that around making sure we identify the structures and systems that has caused the inequities, and identify the people who want it to stay that way, and we can be solution oriented simultaneously with the standing committees to work on it, but also keep our eye on what has actually caused that. And I hope that makes sense.
That's beautiful, beautiful. Mike M, I know you had your hand up, and then Bridget, you just recently raised your hand. Mike, did you still have your question or comment?
Yes, it's Mick. My name is Michelle
Mick.
McDaniels. I'm a
Oh, okay.
former LSC member, and I'm also a former CPS teacher. I just wanted to
Okay.
kind of echo the sentiments that I've already heard in response to Demetrius's questions. Um, in my experience with CPS, only a few schools got a chance to choose their curriculum, and they were the typical level one schools that were considered high achieving and highly competitive. So they got to choose those principals got to choose their own curriculum. Everybody else that were in schools that were understaffed, underfunded, and under-resourced had to accept the curriculum that was chosen by the networks. So, I mean, it was not equitable. It wasn't based on the needs of the students in those specific schools or populations. It was simply, this is what we're choosing for the rest of you. So learn how to live with it. So that's all I wanted to add. It's same old,
That's
same old.
beautiful. Beautiful. And I'm sorry for messing up your name, Mick.
It's no problem.
Okay. And question before we answer any more questions, I am loving this free-flowing conversation. We said we would be here until 8. I'm willing to be here until all the questions are answered. But my question to you is, given this beautiful discussion, I'm thinking about having a colleague to run at least part of this conversation on CAN TV. If he agrees to do that, would there be anybody who objects? And I can't promise he'll do it, but if he can get it done, and if you object, please email me. I'm going to type my email address. You have any questions of me, but really, if you object to being viewed on CAN TV with this conversation and your likeness, let me know and we'll make sure that that doesn't happen. But I think this conversation is rich and it needs to go beyond just us. Okay. Bridget.
Hi, yes, thank you for having this today. This is so important, and I hope this gets repeated a few more times, because we do need to make more of our parents aware of everything that's been talked about today. A lot of times, if you don't know the history of why the schools are in the state they're in, it'll just continue. I had two questions. The first one was pertaining to the history that's been shared, because I just thought the way that the current school system is set up pertaining to the board and the CEO and all of that has always been the case. But listening to the information tonight, so the thing with the networks and the network chiefs and deputies and all of that stuff, like all of that is new too as well, then, correct?
Dwayne.
Your question
Dwayne
was
and
about
Lafayette.
you talking about the structure with the districts? Is that
Yeah,
you asking if that's new?
the network chiefs and deputies and all of that.
They've been around for a while. It's like Lafayette, he could talk about the
Yeah, I
alphabet
think
soup.
since 1995, there have been a lot of different changes of personnel and how they came about. From 89 to 95, again, there were 23 different networks. No, there were 21. There were, I think it was 20 elementary schools, districts, and then there were 3 high school networks. All right, and they were called sub-districts then. Those personnel were then selected by the local school council people in those sub-districts. But since 95, when they approved the new structure, which came in with a CEO as opposed to a superintendent, then a chief education officer, it was a chief financial officer. There were a number of things that were put in place. Since then, it has evolved more and more to where we're at now, but most of the power is directly in the board and in the superintendent.
Mr. Morrow, could you speak on like the current structure when it comes to high schools, for instance, and the because there's network chiefs for elementary school, and then this is kind of one of those most recent changes.
Yeah, they actually have network chiefs for elementary schools, and most of them have a deputy. There are 4 standing high schools that have a network chief, and I believe they all have deputies as well. The chief structure is one, if you look at it from a business model, they're basically middle managers. They're the ones who take the orders from senior level leadership, which is like Pedro Martinez's office, and they're the ones who basically go to the principals and say, this is what the district wants done. And I'll go on record. I would love for the public television or CAN TV or whatever it is, because I have no problem repeating anything that I'm saying here. I'll repeat it to a louder audience. When you look at the chief's responsibility, the chief's responsibility when it first came out was to coach and support principals as far as getting better with the job. They say that's what's happening right now, but that is nowhere near what is happening right now. It is almost impossible for the Network 17 chief and deputy and his team to really facilitate 18 to 20 schools. It's impossible. So principals will not, they'll see the chief if it's an issue, not just a, hey, how you doing? Let me support you. What are some of the things that's going on with you? That's not what the structure is built to do anymore. At one time it was built to do that, but that's not what it is. And then the second thing, I was at Dunbar 9 years and I had at least 8 to 9 different chiefs. So from that standpoint, it's like, how can you sustain coaching? Now that's not the norm in a lot of them, but chief movement, if you will, and they basically come from the principal ranks. And when they come from the principal ranks, now we're struggling to get another quality principal in front of children. So it leaves an opening in that space. So it's a lot of things that's being said about the chief position itself. Although there are some very nice people and they're friends of mine, it's not about the person, it's about the structure and the accountability from it.
I got to add that the positive about being the chief is it's like it's a mini school district, and also a lot of school districts have been coming in Chicago snatching them up, because if you can get triple the pay for the same, I mean, more than what almost the same amount as New York superintendent gets, and you got 20 schools or 10 schools in your district, you out of there. And we lost a lot of good people.
Absolutely. They will leave because you basically, like right now, I have a superintendent certificate and the options are endless, especially for African-American male. So when the chiefs do it, they actually can put on their resume that they were basically over a region of 17 to 20 schools. So they do take that and they do, and it does elevate them. So it is a positive for that person. But as far as being able to train and support the principals and give them exactly what they need, the job is almost impossible.
Oh man.
And the reason I question that, you kind of went a different direction, because I just wondered, to me, my opinion, a lot of the positions in CPS is just about collecting a paycheck, because I know a lot of times of certain parents who's gone to network chiefs about certain issues that they were experiencing at their school. They went through the proper chain of, trying to talk to the teacher, the principal, and then maybe escalated to face and the network chiefs and deputies. And then it seemed like it didn't go anywhere. It was just the same issues just kept happening. So it's like, okay, what are they really here for if they're not here to actually resolve the issues that's happening at the school, and nobody is talking to the principal about certain things that's occurring? So I was just questioning the whole thing, period, because it's like, to me, it just seems like an additional position to have at CPS, and sometimes from a political aspect, because it seems like the ones who do leave CPS go on to some other non-for-profit or something somewhere else. And like you said, the turnover rate pertaining to those positions is crazy. It's like they're there for like a year or two, and then somebody else is in that position.
Well, that's a good question. I just want to say that it kind of validates what the map that Valerie puts together, that when you have that continuity and alignment, then you can get, if there's a problem with some things, then, you as a parent can also get an ally into, let's say, your elected school board member as well as that elected official, to go ahead and bring some attention. Like, again, when I was on the board, I like to promise people that you will get an answer. I cannot promise it to be the answer that you will want, or maybe the correct answer, but it'd be an answer.
Well, again, just so you know, when we go back to the initial structure, those network chiefs from back then, they were called sub-districts, they received 4-year contracts. So they had stability. They also received money for training of those principals. So there was a thing of looking at how they could support the schools as opposed to what it is now.
You know, we still have monthly meetings, but it's not the type of support that principals really, really need. It's not set up that way anymore. I know exactly what you're talking about, because there was a time when you could pick up the phone and say, hey, can you advise me on this? What happens now? It's actually it's a very funny structure, because the principal and the chief and the deputy, they are only going to regurgitate policy. So if the principal tells you know about the policy and you go to the chief, you're going to hear the same thing. And the chief will now tell you, you need to work this out. That's the coaching that you are, that's what you're going to get as far as how you're going to navigate this, because it's going to be policy, 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 policy. And the principal is not going to tell you a different policy than what the chief is going to tell you. They'll try to get you to sit down and negotiate how you can settle this. But at the end of the day, the policy is going to be what everybody's going to stand on.
All righty. We've got 6 minutes. I'm not going to drag this on. I just I think the
And
conversation
then my
has
second
been.
question, my second
Yes,
question was in regard to you, Mr.
Morrow.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Morrow, and yourself and Principal Muhammad. Like, I know the removal of the black male principals. Like, where are you all with that? I know there's been a lot of news media attention to that. What is CPS response to reinstating you all, or where are you at with that?
Where as far as CPAA, we're still putting things together as far as strategic plans to elevate it together, community voice to help stand with us. We'll be at the board meeting tomorrow. The second thing is they've said nothing. To answer that question very bluntly, they've absolutely said nothing. Myself, I have not even received my investigative report on what they're accusing me of. And I was removed December 2nd. I haven't. There's a vicious rumor going around that everybody was removed for PPP loans. That's not true.
Wow.
Yes, that's what they keep putting out there. Every time we go to a community group, they say, well, all y'all removed for PPP loans. We all just start laughing. So we just basically going in an inoculation campaign to let people know that's not the reason. Oh, Principal Muhammad, they said he embezzled money. No, he did not. He pointed out that some teachers were having some inappropriate policy challenges, and that's what he elevated. So CPS has said nothing. We've been pushing and pushing, but this is what we're chasing. We're not asking anybody to believe us. We're asking for people to call for a hearing, call for these investigative practices to be put into a public space and for hearings to come about. That's we met with Representative Mary Flowers today, and we're just telling people, don't just take for what we say. Ask the law department about their policies. The due process is not there. A lot of their policies and procedures have been done in the dark, and we want them to come to the light, because if they come to the light, a lot of things will be exposed. So we've basically been calling on the community to have a collective voice to say, let's investigate these practices, because the data is showing that African-American teachers and principals, especially the males, are the ones who have been targeted. So it's a lot more to go into it. And like I said, the biggest thing right now is to make the processes of removing principals transparent and to call for hearings on the fabricated stories that have been put together against our principals, especially the African-American male principals. Hopefully that makes sense.
Awesome. Thank you. Nzinga, I see you have several questions. Did you want to take the time and ask your questions verbally? I see where you've written about at least three questions.
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, you can. Okay. Thank you all just for all the work that you're doing. This is my first meeting. I was invited through Dr. Griffin. What got my attention the most is the 9 billion, I think, or $900 billion, and how that is dispersed amongst each student. So I'm a business owner of Afriware Bookstore. And my questions are regarding whether any analysis has been done on how the school contracts are awarded, especially as it pertains to just the textbooks, whether or not the curriculum is even reflective of the culture of the students. But that's another question. But has there been some analysis on the demographics of how those school contracts are being awarded? Was part one. And then you reminded me of the schools, the 50 schools that were closed, and to find out if there was any analysis on the libraries that are housed or were housed in those the remaining schools. And the last part is that in actually the content of the curriculum and whether it's culturally relevant to the students that they're serving. So I know there's so many other things you all mentioned about inequities, and it just seems like, oh my gosh, I'm just adding to that, but it's just,
beautiful.
When you're talking about the money, I think that it's easier to expose inequities, regarding that, because it should be reflective of, at a minimum, the demographics of the students.
So if I could take question number one, yes, there is a analysis of the diversity of the contracts awarded in the businesses. There's a mandate that X number of those contracts got to be rewarded to so many, so much percentage to minority business and so much percentage to women-owned business. The challenge is always that, one, getting business to become vendors, two, having sufficient capital, because our payment process is not instantaneous. And a lot of, if you rely solely on CPS for business, you're going to go out of business, because you may not, unless you got some significant capital to keep you afloat until you get paid. Also, what we started to do, and Miguel, the president of VIA, was supportive of me on this, but I didn't get renewed for the board, is that we also was looking at the workforce of the contractors, because it's easy to say that this person is a minority contractor, because a lot of construction companies was getting people like Oakley, Right Way, and say it's a joint venture. They got 40%, right? But they're hiring all those their workers.
Wow.
So we wanted to also get a breakdown of the employees of those contractors to see if their employees are reflective of the community. So two, regarding discretionary input, we don't have any input on discretionary. One thing I want to correct, one thing Karina talked about, we had no expenses that got removed, because we were literally rotating who treated for lunch. I mean, I was paying for, we was buying each other lunch. Only thing we got was a parking pass. If I went out to visit a school and tried to visit as many as possible, I had to take the day off from work. You don't get gas reimbursement, but it was a labor, as Mr. Moore tell you, it's a labor of love. So but that's it. I can't comment on the closing of the school library.
The libraries.
Well, I mean, if the school's closed, the library is really closed. So in terms of like the library, the remaining library, well, the remaining schools it's a priority of ours, but it comes down to issue. One thing that couple of things that we those challenges. Let me preface it by saying that, one, I didn't encourage any of my kids to go into education. I'll be straight up with you. So if you got a shortage of people going into education, we have to prioritize things like special education teachers, case managers, librarians is equally important, as well as music. But you really focus on trying to get, because we are under, we was under ISB oversight, trying to get our stuff together for special education. But it was difficult because, like, for instance, you can have X number of people working on the west side of Chicago, but if there's even for librarians or music teachers, if opportunity opens up on the north side or in Beverly or Mount Greenwood, you're going to transfer. Well, I'm not saying, I don't want to say that wholesale, but more likely you would transfer. And we could not stop a teacher from, he or she wants to seek opportunities. So in terms of librarians, at one time before they were turned over, named after astronaut, what was the black astronaut that died in the space shuttle?
McNair.
McNair had a hard time getting a librarian because they can only afford a half-time librarian. So that librarian had to you had to get a librarian who was like half-time in another school in the west side versus coming all the way from the north side, south side, coming to the west side. So people would like, I'm not going to do that because, that's all they had, which was a shame. It was sending a shame. But I was always willing to fund any and every positions. It's just that, again, we just got to get people organized. The last thing about Black history is mandated to be taught everywhere, but the issue is enforcement. I can go to Juarez and walk in the classrooms and they got Latino history all over the place, right? Which is awesome. Not saying it's not, but you can walk to a Black high school and you don't see nothing until it's maybe Black History Month. Not all of a sudden, but that's just the reality. It's up to local school council members and individuals in the communities to say, hey, we gotta continuously teach our kids about their history and their culture and make sure we got culturally relevant curriculum. Literature could be about Black literature, still literature, right, Mr. Morrow?
Okay, I was around when they did some of the closings, all three sets of closings, but even with the 50. What was supposed to happen with the materials, not just library, but everything, was that it was supposed to follow the kids. So if they were merging schools, if they were doing this, that, and the other. But very honestly, when we went in there to look at the stuff, it was out of date. I mean, there was one school that was supposed to be a computer-based school. They were using Apple IIe's. Nobody wanted those. The type of information in those libraries did not match up to what was being done right now. The encyclopedias and things like that were totally out of date. The machines at that point weren't even compatible with the other machines and things at the school. They were still using floppy disks. All right.
Oh,
So that's what happened. Most of that stuff went to the warehouse over on 39th Street, and then other schools could come in and they could pick and choose what they wanted to use. So as an example, if a school had 50 cartridges for their copying machine, and those cartridges normally cost $100 to $125 each, they could come over and they could get some that would match their machine. If it matched, it was fine. If not, they didn't. But there was really not that much educational material that was relevant to even follow the students. And and that was period. I mean, nobody ran over there to get those books that were out of date.
Wow. And that gives just excellent fodder for those who are trying to keep us divided. I mentioned the libraries in particular because there's an article that talks about how the Austin, Texas school libraries are being converted into detention centers. So the students who don't do well in class are punished by sending them to the library. And what a poor state to be affiliated with in that case, that something bad happening to you, you're sent to go read. It's just a bad message, and it's just not good all the way around. So of course my interest is in getting books that will interest the students. Personally, I used to hate reading, and now I'm a bookseller, so I know that the difference was in the culturally relevant content that captured my interest, you know, increased my curiosity and all of that. I feel that it's the missing ingredient, you know, to the success of our students. But there's so many other things that you all have mentioned. So thanks for, you know, considering yet another issue.
Yes, yes, yes. And on that note, thanks everybody for attending. We're a little bit over. It's 8:08. We're going to close down. I
Can I
have
answer her
everybody's.
question? I see one last question about LSCs and
Oh,
Black History real quick. Yes,
okay.
the LSC can and should be able to and should do. If they don't see that this isn't happening in their schools, they have the ability to push in for the Black History to be taught. And I would agree that it should go into the CIWP, especially if they're not doing it.
Okay, Natasha, would you do a favor? Would you read that question, you know, in the event that we can get this
Okay.
shared out, you know, so people can know what you're responding to?
Okay, great. It says LSCs. So LSCs are the ones who can insist to have Black history taught at a school. Does that need to be added to the CWP to make that happen? And I
And what
say
does
that
CWP stand for?
it's a continuous improvement work plan.
Yes, okay.
And so I would say yes, that, you know, both is accurate, because LSCs have the power, they govern the school. And so if you see that your school is not following the law, because there's a law in place in Illinois for Chicago Public Schools, I think maybe all schools, but I know that it was specific to Chicago Public Schools to really create and to implement a Black history curriculum. And they must teach this curriculum throughout the school year. And it's actually not just Black history, it's African and African American history. It's supposed to be taught within schools.
All right. So on behalf of IAAFER core team and Karina with E4E, she had to leave earlier. She's a parent of a young daughter. She had to take care of her daughter. I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming out. Thank you for your contributions. I'm going to make sure that you get a copy of this recording. I'll get you a raw transcript. I don't have enough time to go through it and make sure it's grammatically correct and all that good stuff, but you'll at least have something in writing that you can refer to. And I hope you can join us, if not tomorrow, you know, in support of Black people in CPS. You know, we're going to go there for the press conference. The principals will be there. And I'm sure other Black groups with issues will be there tomorrow
We're
at
also going to have
3:30.
calls. I think calls is going to be out there too, the caucus of educators, Black educators. Rosita Shatanda's group.
Yeah. Yeah, Rosita, did you have anything to say? Your group is going to be out there tomorrow. I noticed you're here and you're unusually silent. Your voice is always welcome. Or maybe she had to step away. But at any rate, I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for your comments. We will share again the video and the transcript, and we'll keep you posted. We've got your email addresses. We'll keep you posted of what's going on with this advocacy. And if there's advocacy that we need to support you on, you know, let me know and I can share the information out as well. And, you know, I'm encouraged by what I heard tonight and what I see from our people. All right. So without further ado, I will say good night and thank you. And we will share this out. And Dee, I'm so glad we got educators on this line who can answer your question.
Valerie, I think the last time, well, when COVID happened, I went back to school and got my PhD. And I really wanted to know if that's Rosita, who's always on WVON, who speaks out, because I think she just wrapped up her PhD.
Yes,
it
yes.
is.
Oh,
That
we
is
got all these doctors.
that
Doctors
is
in the
Dr.
house.
Rosita
And then
Shatanda.
you also have Dr. Denise Sherrod, who wouldn't say anything because I wanted her to
Yes.
talk about how I invited her too, because I wanted her to tell you how I think she was responsible for assessing 25 schools in Chicago. You know, here in
Wow.
Evanston, we had all these what do you call them, reading specialists and everything. And I also wanted to mention inclusion as far as special education children. I know it's late. Maybe that's a topic for another day because I am concerned about your special ed
Yes.
population.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, to be in touch.
Okay.
Definitely. You know, I'm not an educator. I'm a daughter of an educator, and I'm passionate about education. So,
And plus you're educated.
I want to.
Well, let's give Valerie Leonard a round of applause for this amazing bringing this IAAFER together too. We really appreciate you, Valerie. You might not be a mom, a CPS mom, but you are definitely a passionate woman that love our Black children and students, and we really appreciate you.
Just in closing, I hope
Thank
that
you.
Gerald Monroe is still on. But I just want to tell him to keep the faith, brother, because I remember the last sister from South Loop that they did wrong. It took her 5 years, but she finally went all the way to the Supreme Court. She won her case. They had to give her all her money for 5 years and give her job back at a school that she had her own choice at.
Wow. I think he stepped off.
Okay.
All righty.
That's a wowzer.
Well,
We'll
we will
tell him
definitely.
tomorrow.
Yes, yes, yes. And we'll definitely keep in touch. I know Cole wants to pick up this conversation as well within the next month or so. So we can just keep a rolling conversation and hopefully match it with some action.
Thank everyone for coming out.
Dwayne.
I appreciate you guys. Bye-bye.
Okay. All righty. Good night, everybody. And
Good
thanks
night.
again.
Good night.
All right. Bye-bye.